welcome back to Simply Human, to our YouTube channel. And for those of you listening to us on podcasts, welcome back. Hello, Karen.
Hello to everyone.
Folks, we are going to be returning to the topic of boundaries. We've gotten some requests from people who have asked some questions about what do you do with boundaries, or how do you get better at it when you're self-identified as a people pleaser? So I had some folks ask me about challenges with this. Even the outline that we did and the model that we gave seemed very daunting because they recognize in themselves a habit of feeling afraid of even starting any of it because the instinct is so strong to be a people pleaser. So what do we mean? Because if I say people pleaser, I think if you're a people pleasing person, you probably know who you are. Or if you have someone in your life, you're like, oh yeah, that's my partner, that's my sibling. But we want to just give a definition in case you're someone who's never come across someone who has this trait. But people pleasers often prioritize other people's needs and desires over their own to avoid conflict or gain approval, or to seek that love and security that they feel either they don't deserve or that it's tenuous in some way. And there's a broad array of behaviors, and they tend to focus on seeking validation, acceptance, belonging, and even safety. And it's different from genuine kindness, because there's some of you out there might be thinking, well, I try to think about other people's needs and I like to help people. Does that make me a people pleaser? So I want to make sure we have a distinction here. It's the motivation behind it that is a distinction. So yes, there are people who have a value system that drives thoughtful, helpful, nurturing behavior. And you do it because it comes from your values. It aligns with your sense of who you are. People pleaser, on the other hand, are motivated primarily by fear of abandonment, fear of rejection. So if you're sitting there right now saying, am I a people pleaser? That's what I want you to think of and focus on. Am I motivated by fear and insecurity, or am I motivated by values? So Karen, from your coaching experience, did I miss anything that you want to add?
I think it's interesting how when we were talking about this, we were tying boundaries and people pleasing.
Mhm.
I never really put the two together until we began to talk. And I think this is the problem with boundaries, because boundaries is tied to so many other traits, I guess, or things like people pleasing. And I think what's interesting about people, I said, when you're saying, let's define, I kept thinking about, I always say yes. Everything's like yes,
Mhm.
yes, 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 right? Like I'm always people pleasing. Now, I do believe it's out of kindness, but then again, so I think there's that when you tip over to the point where you become people pleasing, because there's still that kindness in me. I'd like to think there's always the kindness in me, but then there's the tipping over where I'm doing it because I want to belong, or like you said earlier, it's because of those other reasons, acceptance, safety, all these other reasons, because of the fear of. I would have never thought about the fear until I started to learn about people pleasing, and where it really does go overboard, and so that I'm not allowing myself to even self-love. Because
Mm.
for me, part of the reasons why I people please, because I got to get love and self instead of self-love. Because when you're generally kind, I think you're kind to yourself as well. I think people pleasers are kind to themselves because they're always looking for the external validation. So that's sort of what I would add to this
Yeah, thank you
initial
for that
piece.
clarification. So I didn't mean, and then I'm hearing now, I think I made it sound a little bit either or, and Karen's absolutely right. Generally, people who use that strategy are innately nice people,
Yeah.
kind people, generous people. It's that when it comes to those sorts of stressors, because it's already wired in them to have this kindness to them, that becomes the easy go-to to deal with fear and insecurity. So probably if you had someone who was unempathic and insensitive, They probably choose something else to
It
deal
would
with
be
fear and
people pleasing.
insecurity and not people pleasing. So, like Karen said, here's like the healthy range of kindness and generosity and thoughtfulness. And it's when it starts to tilt over, losing connection to those values and leaning now into a maladaptive strategy of avoiding fear, avoiding conflict. So, thank you for bringing that clarification. I appreciate that. Let me remind people, I think it'll be helpful. Just real quick, let's review a model of boundaries that we introduced in one of our early episodes, Why Your Boundaries Don't Work, because it is a model that
Foundational. I
it's a
think it's a
foundational.
foundational model, really.
Yeah, and I'm going to throw up this model with a picture of a three-legged stool, if you're listening on the podcast. And each leg of the stool is necessary to have effective boundaries. Now, many people have heard of the first leg of the stool for boundaries, which is it's knowing what's okay and what's not okay. But that's really not enough. That's only one leg of the stool. And I want to expand a little bit. When we say knowing what's okay and what's not okay, we don't just mean from other people. What's okay for Sally to say or do to me, what's not okay for Sally to say or to me. It's also what's okay and what's not okay from ourselves, because when you, especially when it comes to pleasers, there's a tendency to blow through that one where you're engaging in things that are not okay for you, but because of the need to please, you set that aside and you're doing it anyway, or you're going against your own values, going along to get along. So it's important to understand in that first leg, it is knowing what's okay and what's not okay from the environment or yourself. That's leg number one. And then you discern, but what is actually in my control? Because boundaries are 100% your responsibility. And since you can't control other people, you have to define what is in my control in this situation. And leg number three is I have to then be willing to take action on what is in my control. So if you don't have all three, you are either really just wishing and hoping because you're not identifying what's in your control and you're not taking any action, or you might be really in a request negotiation position because there's an important chunk that's not in your control and you need someone else's cooperation. So the most that you can do is take action and advocating for yourself, but that dependency is still there. So that's really a request situation. And request situations are actually quite common. It's the bulk of our interpersonal relationships, and people get a little confused, like, I should have had boundaries. It's like, well, there actually wasn't anything in your control there. This is a different skill set, effective negotiation, effective advocacy. That's not the same as the time where you have control and you want to assert effective boundaries. If you want more in depth on this, I'll put a link into the about and into the show notes back to the episode that is just dedicated to going over this concept of boundaries. Because what we're going to do for the rest of the episode is we're going to talk about how pleasing behavior and traits and patterns can be challenging. And I'm going to use this model by identifying the pleasing behavior and then what leg of the stool is missing. And so then what do we need to do to get that support back in place? Hey, does that sound like a good plan, Karen? You ready
Exactly.
for this?
And I think it's one thing that's very interesting about the boundaries, because I do think the boundaries really does ask you to actually begin to slow down about what do you really want for yourself in that moment. And that's what I like about slowing it down, because no one can read your mind. So when I have a boundary, I know what I really want and I need to make it explicit, because a lot of us, let's admit, a lot of us, I think this is the hardest one, honestly. Boundaries is very hard to do. It really takes a lot of effort. And it feels like when I first started with boundaries, I'm not there yet, but I'm getting there. It's very difficult. But the things that we're going to be showing to you allows you to become more aware. And then it makes it easier when you start to understand. Christina, one of the things that we said specifically is I always thought when I put in a boundary, it creates a wall.
Mhm.
So maybe you can expand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think what your previous thought about boundaries is really common. And when we're talking about pleasers, since pleasers are driven by a desire to belong, the idea of having boundaries, which feels like a wall, is like, why would I want to do
I
that?
know, exactly. It's like love or hate. They're going to hate me. If I put that
Yes.
boundary up and not, say yes all the time, I'm going to go into that like free zone. They're not going to be me. I'm not going to be a friend anymore. I'm going to be in that freeze out zone. Honestly, that's how I used to
Yes.
think.
I think you and hundreds of thousands of other people have that concern. Hence why I think we did get the comments about, wait, how do we do this if I'm a pleaser? It's really interesting. This is something that people are really comfortable self-identifying as. I'm a pleaser. I'm a pleaser. Because it's like, yeah, I'm a nice person and I like to go along and support people and help people. And how can I have my own needs? And they might get mad or they might not like me exactly.
So let's dive
What
in
we
because that's what we're
Yeah, well,
talking
so
about.
what we talked about, to clarify what Karen said, rather than thinking about boundaries as being a wall that separates, I want you to think about something that's very clearly defined so that there can be a lot of juicy contact. I have a really good sense of where you're coming from and what your needs are, and you have a good sense of where I'm coming from and what my needs are. And now we can connect on that and find out, where are we similar? Where are we different? Where do we compromise? And this really close connection is the birthplace of intimacy. So it's the opposite of separation. Boundaries actually allows for intimacy, and it's counterintuitive. But for pleasers, this is really important to understand. So pleasers tend to be driven to avoid conflict. They keep their own needs hidden so as to make the other person happy, because if they're happy, I'll be connected. Because if you think about what I'm talking about, boundaries like this, pleasers would be like these big open gaps. Like, just let this person right in. You're right in. So you're inside me. I can't get closer than you being right inside my own boundaries.
That's a good
It's
one. I like
But
that.
if you
Yeah.
talk to anybody who is actually in relationship with a pleaser, they will not say that they feel close because they feel like they can never make that contact. Every time they reach forward, it seems like the person just dissipates and they're just not quite there. It's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. And so they don't know where their partner stands, or they might feel like they're the one who has to make the decision all the time and feel burdened by making the decision all the time, because the pleaser
I
just
used
wants to know what you want.
No, and you know what? It's not silly, but so simple. I'm going to say this. It's just like restaurants. It's like, where do you want to go eat? And I just, oh, you can decide. I'm always telling my husband that or my daughter. Like, I don't have a voice. And yet, when I'm at the restaurant, I whisper to my daughter, we restaurant go this all the time. Like, so it's kind of like, then there's that resentment stuff. I just want to be, oh, whatever, you guys decide. And then I'm like,
You guys decide.
yeah.
There's I don't think I
I
think
guess.
I think because pleasers over focus on being accommodating, what they don't recognize in being accommodating is that you are passively putting a burden
On
on the
another
other
person.
person.
Yeah.
So, and now that I'm trying to create some cognitive dissonance here, because that should be driving a pleaser crazy right now. Because, oh no, I'm burdening someone. Well, like, yeah,
Exactly.
that'd be super healthy for you to realize you passively put burdens on the people who you never want to put your own thoughts, ideas, put your own voice out there because you think that you're accommodating and making it easy for other, when that other person's just like, God, I always have to decide. I always have to come up with a plan. Yeah. I've heard partners talk about their pleasing partner and feeling like they just have another child because they become in this role where they're always having to take the responsibility and do the planning and say what to do. And then what's person's supposed to be a partner is one down and going along, and they feel lonely. So pleasers, know this. You put passive burdens on your partner, and your partner feels lonely. They don't have someone to collaborate with. They don't have someone to bounce. You're just like, oh, what is that? What you want? Okay, yeah, whatever's good for you.
Because
You
it's
know,
almost not even recognizing their need. So it's like you just said earlier. I think I'm being nice to them,
yeah.
and yet I'm not recognizing their need that they want to have the dialogue. And I think it's what we were talking about earlier. It's sharing. Like I didn't even share my assumptions. It's the ability to talk and have that intimacy, that dialogue, to talk through it and
Yes.
make an even better decision.
Mhm.
Because maybe my husband doesn't know that something happened and I didn't like that restaurant or something. So let's continue on because I'm just so
Well,
excited
and
to
and
talk.
so let's go a little, because we are going over what are the examples in real life and the consequences, because I think to start breaking the habit of pleasing, we have to sort of have a come to Jesus talk right now, because you've convinced yourself that being a pleaser is this positive trait, even though in the back of your mind, you're like, I'm exhausted. I'm full of resentment. I don't have a voice. I feel sad because I never get to do what I want to do. But you're like, but that's okay. It doesn't work for me, but other people are happy. So it's okay. It's like, no, it doesn't work for other people either,
Well, I
unless
also
it's
think
someone who wants to exploit you.
this is my interpretation of, like, now I feel like I'm not a people pleaser. I've been known to overcome some of this and create some boundaries. But what's interesting, I kept thinking about being a Christian and how being a Christian was always to be kind, selfless, all these other terms. I think that also created that people pleaser trait, because it was
Yes.
even like at the church, where if the church asked me, I had to say yes because the priest asked me. I didn't feel like I could have that conversation. But then I started to get resentment for everything I was saying yes to, that other people, why weren't other people helping out this priest? Why is it? Because they always knew I would say yes. Then I get resentful. Why am I the one with small cadre? People always say yes and everybody else gets to enjoy, right? Then I get resentful.
And
You
we'll
know,
touch on the influence of culture
yeah, later
in
on.
a little bit later. If you aren't yet familiar with the work of Brené Brown, she's a shame researcher, and she's written some really wonderful books like Dare to Lead, The Power of Vulnerability. I thought it was just me. And she has this story about herself going through her own journey and learning about boundaries. And she would be trying to fit in and say yes when she really didn't want to. She said she could tell because her voice would go an octave up. Sure. And grumble. And so she developed a mantra for herself that I think is really good. She talks about buying this ring that she would twist on her finger 3 times, and her mantra was, choose discomfort over resentment. Choose discomfort over resentment. Choose discomfort over resentment. Because for a pleaser, saying no is uncomfortable. But her point was, if you want to avoid the resentment, then it is better to sit with that discomfort and then tell the truth, align with the value of telling the truth, than to just say yes, not really mean it, or you're just doing it to please the other person. It's not what you want, and then be full of resentment and probably take it out on somebody else, because she would talk about, then she'd go and snap at her husband or her daughter.
So
So
when you say sit with the discomfort, what she was talking about, sit with the say no, which is discomfort.
yeah,
That's
that's
the
a
whole point of
discomfort.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was, I love that phrase.
Pleasers tend to be inconsistent. They tend to say yes and agree to whatever it is, even though at different times they may be contradictory things that they're saying yes to or they agree to. I say I agree to Sally. John says something completely different. And I say, oh, yeah, John, that's a great idea. Well, people start to notice that you say yes to anything, and then you lose credibility.
Because you don't have your own perspective.
Not only do you not have your own perspective, but now you look like you are just agreeing to get points.
Yeah.
You're being
Yeah,
political,
exactly. I love
and you lose credibility. And I'm in the work environment, credibility isn't in anything, any relationship. We don't think about credibility as much in our interpersonal relationships, but I can tell you it's just as important with partners and in family systems. Kids and teenagers have a radar for inconsistency and they do not tolerate it well. So you lose credibility with your teen, it's just forget it. Your parenting becomes so much harder. So again, I am planting seeds of cognitive dissonance. Dissonance, it's the opposite of resonance. Resonance is like, oh yeah, that resonates with me. Dissonance is like, oh, my head hurts. We want your head to hurt. If you're a pleasing personality, I want your head to hurt by the end of this episode.
I also think a little bit too is that when you say about that dissonance that you feel, I think that's why we talk a lot about in the earlier sessions that we should bring up here for people who are newer. You don't have to answer right away to yes or no. It's the ability to see how your body feels. I want people to remember is just to slow it down, because when someone asks you something, when you tune to your body, you will feel that you don't really want to say yes. And that to me is where you have that ability to also feel dissonance. In addition to the way you're making me feel right now, I'm not as people pleasers I used to. All right.
So what we're going to go over is how this relates then to the boundary model, because there are certain traits there are many traits. We're just going to go over some of the more common traits that people pleasers tend to exhibit, where these traits tend to come from, the psychological reasons, because I am inviting you to reflect on your own experience to say, oh, is this where I learned to do that? We'll cover which of the boundary legs it impacts, and then what practices you can choose to try to start working on this. What I think I'm going to do is I actually in my notes have put this in a table, and I will get this cleaned up and post it as a link that you could go to my resource tab on my website and pull this up to reflect on later, because I do think it's something you're going to want to go back to. So in case you're driving, you don't.
And you can also do that on my tab, my resource tab as well.
Okay, great. Did you get that set up?
Yes, I'm so excited. Yes, people can come to my resource tab.
Okay, great. Awesome. Okay, so one of the most prominent traits with people pleasers is they genuinely have a hard time saying no. The impulse for safety or to not be rejected, which tends to be the driver, is I don't want to disappoint the person. I don't want to feel rejected if I say no. I don't want to create conflict. So there's just a real difficulty saying no. So what happens? What's going on with boundaries? If I'm not saying no, I'm basically just not even thinking about what's okay and what's not okay. Right? Because in that world, there's no such thing as something that's not okay. So the first leg of the stool gone. And if there is no, there is no action to take. So that's the third leg of the stool. So what can we do when we realize that one of our struggles is I'm uncomfortable saying no? One, learning to sit with discomfort. I've recommended in the past it's an audible by Pema Chodron called Getting Unstuck. And her point about how to get unstuck is to learn to stay and sit in the discomfort, because it's only in building the tolerance for that discomfort can we start to open up options for doing something different. But if as soon as we feel discomfort, we go into our familiar coping pattern, yes, then you're never going to get unstuck from that pleasing behavior. And then the other resource I'm going to put down for you is a book called The Power of a Positive No. This is such an important book, because how many of you, as you're listening to, oh my God, I'm going to have to start learning to say no, would have attached a positive no? Right? Most people who are pleasers think no equals negative, no equals bad, no equals dangerous. Not no is positive.
Yeah, I brought up, I think because when my parents say no growing up, it always seemed it was automatically that negative thing, right? I wanted them to say yes.
So and childhood experience might be where you learn, because think about it, 2, 3, 4 years old, It's most kids are learning to say no. They're learning to get their autonomy and they're just saying no to everything. Even like babies when they don't want to eat, it's like they turn their face away. So we are actually born hardwired with awareness of our own aversions, but we suppress them as we grow through life and we start getting influenced by the many different things we're going to go over in some of these other ones, but it could be traumatic experience. It could just be the social pressures. We start learning that if we say no, there could be this adverse consequence. And depending on your sensitivity, you can start becoming more and more reluctant to express that no.
I think
So,
another practice that I just spoke about, I just want to bring back up to this when you say no. When I started to change the boundary and saying no, I didn't even realize I was saying yes to so many things. Like it was just automatic. Because I think you have to make it a conscious effort to catch yourself saying yes. Then when you can catch yourself, and it's almost like if you had that ring or something, but you just have
yes,
to
that's
like,
the whole
yeah, the
purpose.
ring will help you, right? So if you have something, even just, put that sticky note initially that says, I am going to say no today, on your window. When you say no, you're really thinking about it. Does that make sense what
And
I'm
yeah,
saying?
and when I
Because
say practice saying no,
Mhm.
what I would suggest is practice with people you feel safe with and that you trust, and
Oh, that's a good one. Yes,
be very
that's what I
explicit
do.
and
Mhm.
say, I am working on being more mindful of my pleasing tendencies. And so I need to practice this thing. It's really hard for me to say no. Either say, hey, can you say what? Just ask me to do a bunch of things. And then I'm going to practice saying no. And it could be anything like, I need $500. Can you give me $500? And you have to sit and say no to, do you want to go to this movie I want to go to? Like, no, I don't want to go to that. Just practice saying no, even if what you first say is, Karen says, do you want to go for Chinese food? And I'll say no. And then I'm going to sit and think about it. And they'll be like, oh, yeah, that'd be okay. I don't even care. What I want you to get to is the authentic response. And so you may end up agreeing, but it comes from that authentic place instead of coming from fear. So you just practice saying no. So maybe you want to get a practice partner, and for 90 days, you're going to have this practice of saying no and make it fun. Make it fun. Have them call and have really absurd requests. Something that would actually be easy to say no to. It's just to create more of a knee jerk response to be able that no is an acceptable response. So it'd be like, hey, Karen, I think we should go dye our hair rainbow. No. Yeah. Karen, let's go get a tattoo today. No. I the more absurd, the more
I might
fun
say
you
yes to
can
the
have.
tattoo though, but that's okay. Keep going.
Your goal is to come up, give your
No,
friend
I know,
50
I know
different
what you're
things
saying.
to
It's
practice
just
saying
fun.
no.
And it's just so funny because the more absurd it is, you'll remember, and then you'll start to be able to say no, and then you'll be able to explain why you're saying no. You'll be attached to the reasoning, and the next stop is then having that dialogue. Because first it's just being able to say the word no. That's what Christine is
Yes.
about. It's just saying the word even no.
Right. I want to give an example of just learning, sort of learning a memory and why I'm suggesting you do this. So I'm a rock climber. And when you're learning about safety, so you've got this rope that goes up to an anchor and it comes back down, and the climber's on one end, and your person who's has the rope that's pulling it up as you
Hmm.
climb is your belayer. Now, a safety thing that you should do is you tie a knot at the end of the rope so that it doesn't accidentally fly through it's called a belayer. They have a device that the rope goes through and they use it
Uh-huh.
to break the rope. And so they have a knot at the end. Now, my climbing instructor said, no matter how long or short the climb is, you always put that knot. You can have a really short climb and you're not going to use meters of the rope. Always put the knot. He's like, you want it to become second nature, just muscle memory. So you're not even thinking about it. Because he's like, because the people who don't do it consistently, it's the time that they don't do it that it
That
matters.
matters. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I was climbing with a partner who didn't agree with that advice and hadn't tied a knot at the end of the rope.
Oh
I
no.
I had climbed up and I was being lowered, and it turned out the rope was a little short, and right at the end, the rope went flying through the belay device, and I fell probably the last 15 feet.
Oh my
And thank
goodness.
goodness I fell into bushes.
Oh
And
gosh.
I was like, and it was just as much my fault. I mean, it's just as much my responsibility to make sure the knot is tied as it's my belayers to tie the knot. But I could tell you after that, you always tie a knot.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, but this idea of
Good.
you practice whether you need to say no or not say no. You practice to tie the knot. You do the safety, whether you need the safety or you don't need the safety, because your goal is for it to feel second nature and comfortable. Because for pleasers, saying no equals discomfort.
Yeah.
And it's the practicing it, even when you don't need it, that it will eliminate that feeling of discomfort. And this is just learning theory and how we learn and take something from a lot of thought, recede into the background, into second nature. Because right now, your pleasing is second nature. And we need to help become more aware of that and bring this other tool of practicing to say no. So I'm going to go through some of these a little quickly because it's going to become a little, you're going to see how it's a little bit repetitive. Another trait is seeking approval and external validation through serving behavior. And that generally comes from childhood experiences. This is where societal norms, like Christian norms or family norms, have been in place to reinforce you should be of service. And what it can weaken are all the legs of the boundaries. So if you're driven to be seeking that validation, you're not going to care about what's okay, what's not okay for you. You're actually focused on what's okay, not okay for the other person. So you're not thinking about what's for yourself. You're not thinking at all about what's in your control, because through validation, it's about the other person. And you're not going to take any action that's going to serve yourself, because serving is about serving others. So you literally don't have any legs of the stool in general. So in order to change this, one of the things you want to do is at least build some support on people who value you for who you are and not for what you do. That's huge. And then starting to learn to self-validate, because if you're seeking external validation, you probably haven't learned internal validation. And we are going to recommend return to our very first podcast episode, Unmasking Imposter Syndrome, because that was all about external validation seeking and the skills to build that. Another reason why people do this also is they've kind of mixed up approval equals security. So that's why eyeballs are out. We talk about it in that episode, how there's a threat assessing brain, eyeballs out, because if I could see what's going to make me safe, then that's what I'm going to do over and over and over again. Another trait of people who tend to be people pleasers is they do tend to be sensitive to other people's emotions and their needs. And this could come from they're just naturally high in empathy. It can come from childhood experiences, particularly if you grew up in a home with substance abuse or domestic violence. As a child, you learn to tune in to the moods and the emotions of your caregivers. And then you take that, it's almost a hypervigilance. Like, what mood are they in? Because your safety depends on knowing their mood.
Because you don't want to create the conflict, right? Because you want to be safe, so you won't go into anything.
Yeah. So are they in a good mood? Are they in a bad mood? If they're in
Yeah.
the bad news, then what I need to do to try to make them happy. So this does, so it could come from trauma. And then people are I'm someone just born with a lot of mirror neurons is what science thinks that it is, where empathy comes from. They call them mirror neurons. Some of us just have a whole bunch. And so we're just really sensitive to other people's emotions. And because what happens in the brain when you have person A's brain is firing off feeling emotions, what happens with the empathy neurons is my brain starts firing off similar ones. And then I think they're my emotions. And that's where we can get a little confused about what's driving our behavior. Is it because I want to, or it's just like kind of an automatic thing to do it? Ask yourself, have you ever identified as being an empath, you may be vulnerable to people pleasing, and it may be even more important for you to have psychological energy boundaries. Ask yourself, what's my feelings? What's not my feelings? Was I feeling this way 5 minutes before that person entered the
Oh,
room?
okay.
Because if you weren't, what you're feeling in that moment is probably the other person's feelings. So that's the first thing, discern what's mine and what's not mine, and then get grounded back into yourself and your own body, identify your own values to drive your decision making instead of fear, and then you can take action from there. And so this is basically the second leg of the stool. What's mine, what's not mine, what's in my control, what's not in my control. If you're not stopping to say, wait a minute, those aren't even my feelings, and you're assuming that they're yours, it's almost the opposite. It's over responsibility or over ownership, that the second leg of the stool is now wobbly. Okay. The next one, fear of rejection and disappointment. And the psychological sort of underlying cause tends to be low self-esteem and insecurity. And
I can
so the third,
relate.
yeah, and the third leg of this stool, if I'm insecure, if I have low self-esteem where I don't think I'm worthy to have my own needs, I'm not going to be committing to any kind of actions to forward. Even if I do have a sense of, gosh, that's not okay. That's not the problem. I can recognize I don't like something, but I haven't developed enough self-love and self-efficacy and belief in my own value to believe I have a right to assert. So that's the third leg of the stool, is I don't believe I have a right to take action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think this became a lot easier with the people pleaser when I started to do the self trust stuff and really valuing my own perspective about things and to share my voice. It's like the dialogue stuff, sharing your perspective, your voice.
So I think one of the things that kind of falls into this category, Karen, was it's something I remember when I worked for you. I don't know if I was so much of it was a pleaser, but I did have the low self-esteem at that time. And so a trait that you see with people pleasers, not only are they focused on other people and what makes them happy, they tend to deflect anything positive that comes towards them. It makes that, oh, it's not about me, it's about the other person. And Karen had been trying to give me positive feedback about something, and I did that knee jerk, like dismissing. It made me so uncomfortable. It's almost like I don't want to be seen for the thing that I'm doing, which is to not feel insecure. And so when you bring attention to it, like, no, 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 it's really nothing. It's like it's
It's
all on the down
everybody
low.
else's. I had just a small
Yeah,
role,
it's
and yet
not.
you're the one who really.
It's the self-esteem, and it's like, oh shit, I don't want to be, oh, sorry, I said shit. I don't want to be called out for this behavior, then they're going to find me out. So I would deflect, and Karen challenged me, and she said, Christina, do you understand I'm trying to offer this to you, and it's like a gift, and when you are saying no, 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 it's like you're giving my gift back to me. It's I was so horrified. Man, did that stick with me, because it went against the value. I have a value around like gratitude and saying thank you and being appreciative. And she said it was like giving a gift back and rejecting her gift. I felt so horrible that I committed after that. As uncomfortable as I was, if someone said something nice to me, I said thank you first. And I sat with the discomfort. I didn't know where to
I
make
had to
eye
learn that
contact.
too. Yeah,
It was
exactly.
horrible. But I'm so grateful that you said that to me, because it changed the direct, even though it was hard, I trusted you and I believed you. And Karen was my boss, but we were really close friends. We became really close friends. And so to have a close friend be willing to tell you, wow, that's like rejecting my gift. I probably went back to my office and cried and felt like a horrible human being, because it had such an impact. I changed that behavior like from that point forward. It was so
Well,
helpful.
it's almost like to the point of where you weren't allowing me to make me feel good by giving you this
Yes.
gift. And
Yes.
I think that's the whole point, where you're taking my ability to help you feel good. You always want to say yes to other people, but I also want that feeling. I need that feeling like I've done you good too, right? So
Yeah.
I'm
So
glad you brought that up. That's so true.
I think pleasers fall into this same trap as well, though they tend to be dismissive.
Yeah.
Remember, I'm trying to create cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
So to understand that when you're doing people please and you're deflecting when people are trying to be nice to you or be kind to you and generous to you, and it makes you uncomfortable, even though secretly it's that security you want. But if you knee-jerk reject it because you're committed to, no, I have to keep working and striving to earn that love. I can't, if I get it, I don't know what to do with it, so I
Exactly.
have to earn.
Yeah.
You're actually probably taking something away from the person who is trying to give you that compliment or the appreciation or the gratitude or the love. You're taking it away from them. So note that
Or
is another
let me,
thing.
and another thing is just thinking about, because this is what I used to do. I remember like people would say, you might be too busy, but I just want to know whether you could do this. And they've already gave me the excuse. I noticed that you're too busy, but I just wanted to check in with you to make sure you could do this. I would like not accept that as a gift because they never gave me a way out. As I can say no, but I already go ahead and say yes again because I don't want to disappoint. I would automatically say yes again as a people pleaser because I
So
didn't want
there
to
you
disappoint.
feel like they were giving you the way, they're giving you permission structure to say no.
And yet
And
I
you
still say yes just because I'm a people pleaser. How aggravating is that that I didn't even hear that first part? And they gave me a gift of a way to say, and it's just funny because it's just like, you know, it's just
that's why
funny.
I'm telling people to find a friend who you are going to do intentional
Yes,
practices because, like Karen
exactly.
just said, it's so automatic.
Yeah.
Even when you are given permission structure, it blows right by you. You don't notice it.
And I think another good thing though too, Christina, is what you taught me is I don't have to answer yes right away. I can give myself the few seconds to feel if there's a dissonance or not. But it allows me to just, do that. And I think that's another part of some of the behaviors or practices that we can do.
And then I just want to go through the last two because
Yep, yep.
we're over time. So the last couple ones we want to talk about is avoiding conflict is a big driver. And that is often driven by anxiety and discomfort around if I engage in conflict, someone will be mad at me and then I won't belong. And so we tend to undermine the second leg of the stool in terms
Mhm.
of thinking about, well, what's in my control because I don't even care. I don't want to get in a conflict and I'm certainly not going to take action. So that's the third leg of the stool. So avoiding conflict undermines those two legs of the stool. You mean we might know that it's not okay, but we're too anxious and we're too scared to do anything. So we're in wishing land. We wish that this wouldn't happen. So what you can do here is we have a number of episodes on getting more skillful with conflict, and they focus on cultivating curiosity instead of looking at conflict as aggression, to look at it as something to be curious about. Where's that person coming from? That's actually a gift. You can reframe. You call everything a conflict, just maybe it's not. Maybe someone just has a different point of view and you can bring curiosity and then practice inquiry. And then finally, a huge trait of people pleasing is this concept of self forgetting. And so it's basically you have no legs of your stool. You have no idea what's okay, what's not okay because you've completely cut off from your own value system, from your feelings. You're kind of dissociated, and therefore there is nothing in your control when you're self-forgetting. And there's an amnesia that happens that you don't even know there's action to take. And this tends to come about when there's a trauma history or you grew up in an unstable home because your brain was so busy in just survival. It didn't have the chance to really be aware of the other levels of development that we all normally go through. Trauma really cuts that off at the knees. And then self forgetting can also be an artifact of the social and cultural norms. There are cultures that really have a message that you should, especially it can be around if you're female in particular, that you're already down on the ladder and you are there to be of service, that other people's needs are more important, and that you should not have this awareness. So the awareness or what's cultivated in you is to have eyeballs out, to only be paying attention to everybody else, that you haven't even learned how to tune into yourself. And this was a big source for me that my therapist had to work on. and it was very body focused. I would be having feelings, and she's, where do you feel that in your body? I'd be like, what?
Yeah.
It took a while for me to
It's
understand,
hard to
to
do
check
body
in, like,
awareness.
what is this body? What does this mean to check in with yourself? What am I looking for? I had to start learning how to recognize tension. Tension was equal to a little signal that something was not right. Taking some time to identify what your own personal values are, which means you're going to have to challenge and test whatever was handed down to you. Does this really fit for me? Does this work for me? Do I really believe this, or was I told to believe this? But if I do the body check, I feel discomfort. All this requires learning to be present. And mindfulness practices, mindfulness meditation can help you learn. You start by bringing your awareness to just your inhale and your exhale, because that is happening in the present moment. So you cultivate learning how to be present. And sometimes it even helps to look for role models that are outside of that doctrine that you were raised with, but someone who you admire. Self-forgetting is really tough because it's like there's no foundation. So how do you start building that foundation? Yeah. And that is work that really is going to be helpful to have a therapist working with you, because that is a much deeper piece of work. So I know we covered a lot again. I hope that this helped to bring awareness. If you're a people pleaser, I hope that being challenged by some of these ideas that can create dissonance, you're putting a burden on other people, that you may be rejecting gifts, that these sorts of things you may not have thought creates enough dissonance for you to start questioning this habit and this pattern. And then pick one or two, we always say pick one or two to start of behavior changes to start working on. And I would recommend not actually starting with no first. I think you need to identify your values first so that you know what to say no to. Or if you just want to practice saying no to the values work a little later, then do it in that fun way of having a friend ask really absurd things that you just practice the habit of saying no and noticing the world doesn't end. You don't die. You're not thrown out of the cave, and just practice saying no. So those are your choices. Start with identifying values, start with practicing saying no. Karen, do you have any last words of wisdom?
Yeah, I just also want to say out to people or Christians out there specifically, if I may, to see a lot about when I was doing a lot of people pleasing. It was because we say the two greatest commandments are love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, with every part of your being. Love God, right? And then love others as you would love yourself. But as a people pleaser, I always heard love others. Right? I always forgot that as you would love yourself, just like Jesus would love you, is what I was, putting it together. And I think that's the problem where I thought love other mean yes, 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 yes. Right.
Mm.
And that's not what God meant by that. God also wants you to realize that He loves you. So the fact that when you say, you're not taking care of yourself, He is sad. And there's that balance there, saying yes to others, but also saying, taking care of yourself, self-care too. And I think that's where I want to just bring up to our Christian listeners something just to think about, because that's where I started to balance and get much better with boundaries and this whole thing regarding people pleasing. Again, it's saying yes or saying no, but it's also sharing your perspective as why you're saying no, or giving them other solutions and other things like that. A big learning I had, that I wanted to serve others because we were told to serve others, but it's
Mm.
not to the detriment of my own self being. That then it's like that oxygen mask. I gotta take the oxygen mask first to make sure I can serve others because I have to take care of myself. Then I can serve others better because I've been able to take care of myself as well. So that's kind of like the perspective I wanted to share too. And guys, it's possible. I think that's the whole point of what we love to do, is create awarenesses for different people. And as Christina was talking, there's an element of people please I still do, I'm recognizing. And it just allows me to think deeply about it. And it just is bring that awareness, and then you'll start to notice things. And don't get upset with yourself. Because like we said earlier, a lot of people are people pleasers. A lot of people are not good with conflict. This is why we're bringing up these various topics, because we've dealt it with ourselves. Other people have it. and we're all on a journey together. So that's what I would close in.
All right. Well, thank you, Karen, for that. And
Well, thank
everybody,
you for everything you taught us today, too.
and don't forget, we'd love to hear your comments on this, because this episode was the result of people sending in requests and comments. So keep it coming, and we're happy to respond. And then we'll see you next week.
And don't forget to subscribe or hit a like.
All right. Thanks, everybody. See you
Bye.
later.